Hello, everybody. I am bringing a new podcast today. It is pouring down rain where I am again, so I'm not working today. And thunderstorms are going on. Rain is just coming down in sheets. Trees are coming down. It's crazy. I love days like this. I love the rain, and I'm very happy to be in today to just kind of nest and just have a day off. So I thought I would do another podcast because I got something in last night that is just mind blowing to me, and I wanted to share it with you. I don't know how many of you are aware of the fairies. I know we grow up with, these fairy tales of, it's funny, fairy tales of stories there. We've been conditioned to believe that it's all make believe, that it's not real, that they're just stories. It's real. Everything we've been taught to believe is a fairy tale or isn't real, but yet we've been, grown up our entire lives with movies, books, everything around us is surrounded by these stories. Why is that? Where did these ideas come from? Why are there stories in the Indian tribes that are true stories that they tell and they pass down as truth? There's things written in, hieroglyphs and stuff about these creatures. And they had to start, have had to have started from somewhere. And I believe it's all real. I believe that we've been conditioned to believe that it's fake, but it was their way of letting us know that they really exist. And it was a form of trickery, in a sense. So we could possibly become their victims. Supposedly, in the spiritual realm, the law is that they have to let us know that they exist and, I guess, in some form, get our permission to interact with us. And this would be a way that they could do it. They lead us to believe, they show us that they're there in our movies, our books, the legends that we hear, but yet they make us feel like it's not real, but it is real. There have just been countless stories of this stuff, you guys. This is just, it's crazy. So if you open your mind and understand that there's a lot of crap going on here, and it's just mind bending. It's just like we have to almost remake our whole thought process here and learn to accept that everything we thought was like fantasy is actually real. And that's a feat. That's quite a feat here. So I want to read this to you and you can draw your own conclusion. It's called the fairy theory. After reading many of these cases, both from the book and others not covered by David Paulides, namely from other places with many disappearances like Norway and Ireland, I'm inclined to believe that a majority of these cases, probably 80% or so, involve the work of the Fae. And that's the fairy world. I actually believe that Bigfoot and the Dogmen could potentially be part of the Fae. I really do believe that. David's got a new clip up today on YouTube. It talked about these two different cases where these both guys ran into an invisible creature that was stalking them or chasing them. And you could see the grass, really tall grass parting. You could see imprints of their feet and leaves like kind of swirling around their legs, but you couldn't see the actual legs. You could hear like sound coming from it, but it was invisible. That sounds like fairyland, another dimension in another way. We could add a different word to it. I mean, in their world, it may not be called fairy. It might be something completely different. But he put these stories up, and there were really good stories. And one of the kids came from a really Christian or Catholic background. And so you always think, maybe that they won't bother you if you're, close to the Lord. But I don't know. It seems like you have to invoke the name of the Lord in order to get rid of them. In a lot of the cases, they say that. But it's some really crazy stuff. But yeah, if you get a chance to catch David's new clip up there, it's pretty good. He always has good stuff. And he has been the person that has just brought all of this to everybody's attention, I think, more than anybody has. This is fascinating to me, and I'll read on here and you'll understand why. Now, before you write this off, you have to realize that fairies are not what the mainstream media have shown us in childhood. Most of them are not tiny creatures composed of light fluttering around, sparkling in pixie dust, ALA Tinkerbell. These beings are very much real with some human-like qualities. They can range anywhere from 4 inches to 7 feet tall. They are a very diverse group of creatures, much like humans. I will raise a couple of parallels from David Paulides' cases and from a book I highly recommend highly recommend the readers to read. It's called The Fairy Faith in Celtic Countries by W.Y. Evans Wentz. Mind you, this book was published in 1910, way before any of Paulides' work, over a full century ago. This is what blew my mind, guys. This guy that wrote this is from German descent, heavy German descent. And I don't know if you know, but a lot of the disappearances are from people that are of German descent. And he wrote this book. He was he joined the Tibetan monastery and studied Buddhism, and he did a lot of things, wrote several works, and he had some experiences with what he called the fairy world, the fae. And so he wrote this over 100 years ago. And everything that David Paulides talks about with these disappearances that he's investigated, it's all here. It's all in his books. It's all backed up by everything this guy wrote over 100 years ago is what everybody's running into. So this guy knew something. This is just fascinating. I can't wait to get this book. And then it goes on to say, I believe this book holds a key to understanding what is going on. Quoted is text from the book. People tend to disappear near boulder fields. David Paulides talks about this nonstop. Fairy preserves, they're called. A heap of stones in a field should not be disturbed. This is what this writer says. Though needed for building, especially if they are part of an ancient tumulus. The fairies are said to live inside the pile, and to move the stones would be most unfortunate. That's page 38 of the book. Where fairies live. When I asked Patsy where the fairies live, he turned half around and pointing in the direction of Dun Angus, which was in full view on the sharp skyline of Erinmore, said that there, in a large tumulus on the hillside below it, they had one of their favorite abodes. But he added, the rocks are full of them, and they are small fellows. That's page 41. This is all, David talks all about this, about boulder fields, how people are missing in boulder fields constantly. This is just mind-blowing. I mean, this is 100 years ago this book was written. Oh my goodness, this is nuts. Okay, goes on. People tend to disappear near berry bushes. David talks about that. A girl in the book, a girl recovered from Fairy. One day just before sunset in midsummer, and I, a boy then, my brother and cousin and myself were gathering bilberries. Whortleberries, that's what they're called, up by the rocks at the back of here, when all at once we heard music. We hurried round the rocks, and there we were within a few 100 feet of 6 or 8 of the gentle folk. And they dancing when they saw us. A little woman dressed all in red came running out from them towards us, and she struck my cousin across the face with what seemed to be a green rush or a stick. We ran for home as hard as we could, and when my cousin reached the house, she fell dead. Father saddled a horse and went for Father Ryan. When Father Ryan arrived, he put a stole about his neck and began praying over my cousin and reading psalms and striking her with the stole, and in that way brought her back. He said if she had not caught hold of my brother, she would have been taken forever. Supposedly they take people. Page 72 of the book. The fairy procession. We were told as children that as soon as night fell, the fairies from Rath Ringlestown would form in a procession across Tara Road, pass round certain bushes which have not been disturbed for ages, and join the Gankina, or host of industrious folk, the Red Fairies. We were afraid, and our nurses always brought us home before the advent of the fairy procession. One of the passes used by this procession happened to be between two mud wall houses, and it is said that a man went out on one of these houses at the wrong time, for when found he was dead. The fairies had taken him because he interfered with their procession. This is on page 33 of the book. Page 179, after the 31st of October or after Halloween, the blackberries are not fit to eat, for the pixies have then been over them. Wow. Abrupt weather changes after a person disappears. David Paulides again talks all about this. You got to understand, David Paulides has been investigating this for decades, and he is a really credible investigator. He's been a police officer. He's worked with forest rangers, and he was brought in to do this. He knew nothing about it when he started, and he's just mind blown by all of it. It just doesn't add up. It all adds up to supernatural stuff, guys. What's going on is not of our realm. It's something else. And anybody that's a believer in God or a believer in anything that's supernatural, and almost all of us have had something happen in our life. We've all had some kind of, a feeling, or we've seen a ghost, or we've had some kind of supernatural encounter to some degree. If you believe in that, if you believe in God, or you believe in the devil, or you've had any kind of experience supernaturally, then you have to be open to the fact that this is all real, that this could be happening, that there is a whole realm out there of beings that we know nothing about other than what we're learning now, and that we need to protect ourselves from these beings, that they're not all friendly. So this is why this is so important. Okay, again, abrupt weather changes after a person disappears. Where fairies live, in a spot near Oak Quarter, another place was pointed out where the fairies are often seen dancing. The name of it is Mohin Andamsha, the little bog of the dance. Other sorts of fairies live in the sea, and there's a lot of water deaths and disappearances. And some of them who live on Arranmore, probably in conjunction with those in the sea, go out over the water and cause storms and wind. That's page 41 of the book. David talks constantly about almost everybody that's found is near water. Along the rants, the inhabitants tell about fays who appear during storms. These storm fairies are dressed in the colors of the rainbow and pass along following a most beautiful fay who is mounted in a boat made from a nautilus of the southern seas. In Upper Brittany, as in Lower Brittany, the fays generally had their abodes in tumuli, in dolmens, in forests, in wastelands where there are great rocks, or about menhirs, standing stones. Makes you wonder about Stonehenge, doesn't it? And many other kinds of spirits lived in the sea, and troubled sailors and fisher folk. Like all fairy folk of Celtic countries, those of Upper Brittany were given to stealing children. There are so many missing children. Page 204 of the book. Page 228, in the New World, we find in the Northern American red men a race as much given as the Celts are to a belief in various spirits like fairies. They believe that there are spirits in lakes, in rivers, and in waterfalls, in rocks and trees, in the earth and in the air, and that these beings produce storms, droughts, good and bad harvests, abundance and scarcity of game, disease, and the varying fortunes of men. My daughter was up in the forest. It was about an hour away from where I am now, not quite an hour. It was in a very forested area with a beautiful area to hike, and there's a neat watering hole up there. She literally saw a 3-foot man that was all red. Now, when she told me this story, I thought the redness struck me because I never had heard of them being all red until last night in this when I got this. I heard, and then it made me realize that, my God, I mean, they're living everywhere. Young, typically athletic men are taken. This is another thing David talks about. Everything in here is what David talks about. Mr. J.C. Lawson, who has very carefully investigated the folklore of modern Greece, says the Nereids are conceived as women, half divine, yet not immortal. Always young, always beautiful, capricious at best, and at their worst, cruel. Their presence is suspected everywhere. Like Celtic fairies, these Greek Nereids have their queens. They dance all night, disappearing at cock crow. They can cast spells on animals or maladies on men and women. They can shift their shape. They take children in death and make changelings, and they fall in love with young men. Among the Romane peoples, the widespread belief in the Lel shows in other ways equally marked parallels with the fairy faith of the Celts. These Lel wait at crossroads and near dwellings, or at village fountains, or in fields and woods, where they can best cast on men and women various maladies. And it makes you wonder why they do this stuff. This would be another word for demonic, in the Christian world. But, who knows? Sometimes they fall in love with beautiful young men and women, and have on such occasions even been controlled by their mortal lovers. That's on page 230 of the book. Page 293, this brings us directly to the way in which the Cid or Tuatha de Danann of the olden times took fine-looking young men and maidens. Perhaps one of the earliest and most famous literary accounts of such a taking is that concerning Aed, son of Eocade, Lethderg, son of the king of Leinster, who is represented as contemporary with Patrick. While Aed was enjoying a game of hurley with his boy companions near the Cid of Liamhain Softsmock, two of the Cid women who loved the young prince very suddenly appeared, and as suddenly took him away with them into a fairy palace and kept him there for 3 years. That's page 293. Another occurrence that David Paulides talks about: smart, intellectually gifted people are taken. The guy that wrote this, like I said, he was very gifted and of German descent, highly intelligent, and he had encounters with them. The gentry described, and they call them the gentry. That's the fae, I believe. In response to my wish, this description of the gentry was given. The folk are the grandest I have ever seen. They are far superior to us, and that is why they are called the gentry. They are not a working class, but a military aristocratic class, tall and noble appearing. They are a distinct race between our own and that of spirits, and they have told me their qualifications are tremendous. We could cut off half the human race, but would not, they said, for we are expecting salvation. I'm almost wondering if that's the fallen angels. And I knew a man 3 or 4 years ago whom they struck down with paralysis. Their sight is so penetrating that I think they could see through the earth. They have a silvery voice, quick and sweet. The music they play is most beautiful. Satan was in charge of music in heaven. I don't know if you know that or not. He was the angel that was in charge of music, and that he's affected the music world so greatly with the spells and stuff that even Crosby, Stills, and Nash, the Crosby guy, David, I think it's David Crosby. He's supposed to be the head of the coven and the witchcraft in the music industry. He's the leader. The music they play is most beautiful. They take the whole body and soul of young and intellectual people who are interesting, transmuting the body to a body like their own. I asked them once if they ever died, and they said no, we are always kept young. Once they take you and you taste food in their palace, you cannot come back. And I've heard that before too. There was somebody that had an encounter with the fairy, with the fae. They took this person to a different realm, to a home, and they tried to coax them to eat, and the person wouldn't eat. They were scared, and then they did bring the person back, and before they let them go, they said, if you would have eaten, you never would have been able to return. So that's pretty crazy. You are changed to one of them after you've eaten and live with them forever. May not be such a bad thing, huh? Page 46. People who come back are sometimes in a state of extreme confusion. There has been countless cases of people that have lost their way out in the wilderness or the woods, hiking, fishing, camping. Something happened to them, something strange, and they woke up wherever they had gotten back to, like their home, in their car, wherever, and they had no idea how they got there. They had been in a complete state of confusion, almost hypnotic. Those who return from fairy, which is basically what they're saying is fairyland or feyland, persons in a short trance state of 2 or 3 days duration are said to be away with the fairies enjoying a festival. There was just recently a man that I'd have to look up his name again. I'm just kind of throwing this out there. He was skiing and he was in ski gear. They found him, it was about a week later, across the country. A trucker was driving him. He had a new haircut, new clothes on. He had no idea how he got there. And the trucker had no idea who he was. He just picked him up. He was hitchhiking. And this was another case where he was out in the mountains skiing, and then he just a week later comes to his senses and has no idea how he got there, doesn't know how he got his hair cut, doesn't know how he got new clothes, knows nothing. The family had been looking for him. Oh, this stuff is just nuts. Okay, so anyway, the festival may be very material in its nature for the Fae, or it may be purely spiritual. Sometimes one may thus go to fairy for an hour or two, or one may remain there for 7, 14, or 21 years. The mind of a person coming out of fairyland is usually a blank as to what has been seen and done there. Another idea is that the person knows well enough all about fairyland, but is prevented from communicating the knowledge. A certain woman of whom I knew said she had forgotten all about her experiences in fairy, but a friend who heard her objected and said she did remember and wouldn't tell. A man may remain awake at night to watch one who has been to fairyland to see if that one holds communication with the fairies. Others say in such a case that the fairies know you are on the alert and you will not be discovered. They won't be discovered. That's on page 39. There's even cases of people that have seen gnomes, like the little yard gnomes that you buy. Supposedly they've had, people have had statues of these things in their yard that have come alive and they've run around. And people these are credible people that have seen this, and they're scared to death to tell it because they're afraid people think they've lost their minds. But there's been thousands of cases of this. So, when you buy those yard gnomes, are you actually buying a real gnome? Are they like stone, like gargoyles? Do they stay like a statue, and then when they're out at night, they actually come alive? What is going on here? This is just, when you've got countless cases all over the world from credible people telling you this stuff, how many people do you have to hear this from before you believe it? The biggest cluster of strange disappearances in the United States is located in Yosemite. I don't know why I said Yosemite. I used to say that as a kid. Yosemite National Park. And that is what David Paulides talks about constantly, is Yosemite. So that's the biggest cluster of strange disappearances in the United States, is Yosemite National Park. I have been told by a friend in California who is a student of, I don't know how to pronounce that right now. It's like psychical sciences, that there exist in certain parts of that state, notably in the Yosemite Valley, as the red men seem to have known, according to their traditions, invisible races exactly comparable to the gentry. These are the Indians that have seen these beings, and they've told about them, and people just dismiss it and write it off like it's just stories they tell. You don't have every Indian tribe telling you about something and not believing them. And they would know more than anybody because they live out there with it. These California races are said to exist now, as the Irish and Scottish invisible races are said to exist now by seers who can behold them. So there must be certain people that can see them. and, like the latter races, are described as a distinct order of beings who have never been in physical embodiments. If we follow the traditions of the Red Men, the Yosemite invisible tribes are probably but a few of many such tribes scattered throughout the North American continent, and equally with their Celtic relatives, they are described as a warlike race with more than human powers over physical nature, and as able to subject or destroy men. Well, that's comforting. Wow, that was a footnote 47.1. These Cid, who are the gentry of the Ben Bulben country and have kindred elsewhere in Ireland, Scotland, and probably in most other countries as well, such as the invisible races of the Yosemite Valley. Page 284. I'm quoting the book. And we turn now to examine this other side of their life, to behold the Cid as a warlike race, and also the invisible races of California are likewise described as given to war and mighty feats of arms. Page 300. So we've got fairies running around of all sizes with all kinds of powers and abilities that like to create war. This is comforting. Hang on, I had to get a drink here. When a child's clothes are found, it tends to be bright and again near water or dry creek beds. David Paulides talks about this. Never wear red or bright yellow or orange in the wilderness, especially a child, especially red. Do not wear red. They talk about a lot of the people that have been found dead had red on. In the neighborhood of Snowdon, the fairies were believed to live beneath the lakes, from which they sometimes came forth, especially on misty days. And there again, the weather always gets bad. And children used to be warned not to stray away from their homes in that sort of weather, lest they should be kidnapped by them. These fairies were not Christians, and they were great thieves. They were fond of bright colors. They were sharp of hearing, and no word that reached the wind would escape them. This is page 136. I'm going to send this to David. I'm going to see if he has ever heard of this. People disappear for days, even weeks on end, and reappear untouched by the elements. That's happened. Multitudes of cases. Time in fairyland. People would be 20 years in fairyland, and it wouldn't seem more than a night. A bridegroom who was taken on his wedding day was in fairyland for many generations, and in coming back, thought it was the next morning. He asked where all the wedding guests were and found only one old woman who remembered the wedding. This was on page 95. There was a story about another man that was abducted. He was taken. He doesn't have any recollection, as is typical. He showed back up to the house that was his, and there was somebody else living in it. He thought he'd only been gone like a couple days, and the house had been up for sale for a couple of years. Somebody had bought it. He had been missing for like 10 years. He went to his dad's house, and his dad literally almost had a heart attack. And he sat him down. He said, "Son, you've been missing for 10 years. And he couldn't get over it. His house had been sold. They gave up on him. They had searched everywhere. They thought he was dead and just, they couldn't find his body. But that was another story. The way a mortal might be taken by some of these names, Tilwith Teg, was by being attracted into their dance. If they thus took you away, it would be according to our time for 12 months, though to you the time would seem no more than a night. Page 145. In the invisible condition thus induced, people were able to join the pixie revels, during which, according to the old tradition, time slipped away very, very rapidly, though people returned from the pixies no older than when they went with them. Page 175. People of European, more specifically German descent, tend to disappear. This is what I was talking about. In Europe, the Greek peasant as firmly believes in nymphs or nereids as the Celtic peasant believes in fairies, and nymphs, nereids, and fairies alike are often the survivals of an ancient mythology. Among the Roman people, the widespread belief in the Lel shows in other ways equally marked parallels with the fairy faith of the Celts. The Albanian peoples have evil fairies no taller than children, 12 years old, called in modern Greek, I cannot say this word, I'm going to try, Tewitka, which means those without, who correspond to the Lel. Young people who have been enticed to enter their round dance afterwards waste away and die, apparently becoming one of those without. These parallels from Romane lands are probably due to the close Aryan relationship between the Romanes, the Greeks, and the Celts. That's page 230. Romans or Romans. The writer's saying Romanes. As of recently, people are being taken in cities. This is going on now. Many, many cases of people walking out of bars and all of a sudden they just disappear into thin air. There's even a recording on YouTube of a man that was on the phone with his wife and she heard this horrendous sounding monster and him screaming. The phone goes dead. He's never to be seen again, ever. Never found his body. As of recently, people are being taken in cities near or surrounded bodies of water. A lot of the people, too, end up dead in the water. They have no idea how they got there. In some of these cases where the person is on the phone, a gushing of wind, I'm probably told you something I shouldn't have because it might get into this. A gushing of wind can be heard as if taken in the air by something. It could be aerial host or as written up above, nereids which live in the water. On people being taken airily, in my experience, there was always a good deal of difference between the fairies and the hosts. The fairies were supposed to be living without material food, whereas the hosts were supposed to be living upon their own booty. Generally, the hosts were evil and the fairies good. Though I have heard that the fairies used to take cattle and leave their old men rolled up in the hides. One night an old witch was heard to say to the fairies outside the fold, "We cannot get anything tonight." The old men who were left behind in the hides of the animals taken usually disappeared very suddenly. I saw 2 men who used to be lifted by the host. They would be carried from South Uist as far south as Barrowhead and as far north as Harris. Sometimes when these men were ordered by the host to kill men on the road, they would kill instead either a horse or a cow, for in that way, so long as an animal was killed, the injunction of the host was fulfilled. That's on page 106 of the book. This is crazy. This was written 100 years ago, and this is everything David's talked about. I just can't get over this. Fairies and fairy host, slaw. Generally, the fairies are to be seen after or about sunset and walk on the ground as we do, whereas the hosts travel in the air above places inhabited by people. The realm of the demons is in the air too, guys. So that's pretty fascinating, and the hosts are the evil ones. The hosts used to go after the fall of night, and more particularly about midnight. You'd hear them going in fine weather against a wind like a covey of birds, and they were in the habit of lifting men in South Uist, page 108. A majority of these cases are young boys disappearing. In some clusters, only boys, males, have been taken, most notably at Crater Lake, and that's another one David talks about. Pygmy-sized Tylwyth Teg. I was born and bred where there was tradition that the Tylwyth Teg lived in holes in the hills, and that none of these Tylwyth Teg was taller than 3 to 4 feet. Some of these different names I'm using is because in different cultures they have different names for them, but they all mean the same thing. Hang on, I gotta get a drink. Okay. So they were no taller than 3 to 4 feet. It was a common idea that many of the Tylwyth Teg, forming in a ring, would dance and sing out on the mountainsides or on the plain, and that if children should meet with them at such a time, they would lose their way and never get out of the ring. If the Tylwyth Teg fancied any particular child, they would always keep that child, taking off its clothes. David talks constantly about why people are found without their clothes, and putting them on one of their own children, which was then left in its place. They took only boys, never girls, page 148. I don't know what is wrong with girls. General accounts of fairies taking people. Encounters with the gentry. When I was a young man, I often used to go out in the mountains over there, pointing out of the window in their direction to fish for trout or to hunt, and it was in January, on a cold, dry day, while carrying my gun, that I and a friend with me, as we were walking around Ben Bulben, saw one of the gentry for the first time. The gentry is the fairies. I knew who it was, for I had heard the gentry described ever since I could remember. And this one, hang on, my Facebook thing is coming up. I could remember, and this one was dressed in blue with a headdress adorned with what seemed to be frills. When he came up to us, he said to me in a sweet and silvery voice, "The seldomer you come to this mountain, the better. A young lady here wants to take you away." One of the fairies, female, wanted to take this man. Then he told us not to fire off our guns because the gentry disliked being disturbed by the noise, and he seemed to be like a soldier of the gentry on guard. As we were leaving the mountains, he told us not to look back, and we didn't. I wonder why not to look back. I've heard that before too, never to look back. Another time I was alone trout fishing in nearly the same region when I heard a voice say, it is barefooted and fishing." Then there came a whistle-like music and a noise like the beating of a drum, and soon one of the gentry came and talked with me for half an hour. He said, "Your mother will die in 11 months, and do not let her die unanointed." And she did die within 11 months. As he was going away, he warned me, "You must be in the house before sunset. Do not delay, do not delay. They can do nothing to you until I get back in the castle." As I found out afterwards, he was going to take me, but hesitated because he did not want to leave my mother alone. Wow. After these warnings, I was always afraid to go to the mountains, but lately I have been told I could go if I took a friend with me. He was told by this gentry guard. This is on page 45. Nakma fairies. Nakma, which you see over there, is said to contain excavated passages and a palace where the fairies live, and with them the people they have taken. And from the inside of the hill there is believed to be an entrance to an underground world. It is a common opinion that after consumptives die, they are there with the fairies in good health. The wasted body is not taken into the hill, for it is usually regarded as not the body of the deceased, but rather as that of a changeling, the general belief being that the real body and the soul are carried off together, and those of an old person from fairyland substituted. The old person left soon declines and dies. My phone's going nuts here, guys. I don't know what's going on. Page 37. Fairies. Siddhyoga, according to our next witness, Stephen Ron, a piper of Galway, with whom I have often talked. There is one class of fairies who are nobody else than the spirits of men and women who once lived on earth, and the banshee is a dead friend, relative, or ancestor who appears to give a warning. The fairies, he says, never care about old folks. They only take babies and young men and young women. If a young wife dies, she is said to have been taken by them and ever afterwards to live in fairyland. Almost sounds like a heavenly realm, doesn't it? The same things are said about a young man or a child who dies. Fairyland is a place of delights where music and singing and dancing and feasting are continually enjoyed, and its inhabitants are all about us, as numerous as the blades of grass. Page 39. Page 72, the good people and Mr. Gilleran, after the mother had testified, the daughter, who was quite of the younger generation, gave her own opinion. She said that the good people live in the forts and often take men and women or youths who pass by the forts after sunset. Oh my God. Page 87, the fairies were wont to take away infants and their mothers, and many precautions were taken to safeguard them till purification and baptism took place. When the fairy power became ineffective, placing iron about the bed, burning leather in the room, giving mother and child the milk of a cow which had eaten of the Mothan pearlwort, Pinguicula vulgaris, a plant of virtue, and similar means were taken to ensure their safety. If the watching women neglected these precautions, the mother or child or both were spirited away to the fairy bower. Many stories are current on the subject. He said they thought of them as a race of spirits capable of making themselves visible to mortals, as living in underground places, as taking fine, healthy babes and leaving changelings in their place. So your child may not even be your child. These changelings would waste away and die in a short time after being left. So firmly did the old people believe in fairies then that they would ridicule a person for not believing, and now quite the reverse state has come about. Page 94. Page 125, the taking of Mrs. K. The belief in fairies is quite a living thing here yet. For example, old Mrs. K about a year ago told me that on one occasion when her daughter had been in Castletown during the day, she went out to the road at nightfall to see if her daughter was yet in sight, whereupon a whole crowd of fairies suddenly surrounded her and began taking her off toward South Burrell Mountain, and she added, I couldn't get away from them until I had called my son. She called out to her son, page 125. In closing, I'll leave you with a quote from the book. There seems to have been always and everywhere, or nearly so, a belief in a race neither divine nor human, but very like human beings who existed on a plane different from that of humans, though occupying the same space. This has been called the astral or fourth dimensional plane. Why astral? Why fourth dimensional? Why plane? Are questions the answers to which do not matter, and I do not attempt to defend the terms, but you must call it something. This is the belief to which Scott refers in the introduction to the monastery as the beautiful but almost forgotten theory of astral spirits or creatures of the elements surpassing human beings in knowledge and power. Wow. I can just say wow. This is when you really start believing in this and you really put aside everything that you've been conditioned to believe. There is an agenda to get us to believe what, quote, they, I don't know who they is, but whoever they is, and in my opinion, it's Satan and his crew, they are conditioning us to believe or not believe in whatever they want. And they have stripped us of the knowledge and belief of what's really going on. And there's a true agenda here going on. So David was talking about a book written called Smear. If you can pick up that book and pick up this one and start reading, start educating, open your mind, and start understanding that there is a lot more going on this planet than you could ever imagine or wrap your mind around. Stay safe, you guys. God bless you, and I will be talking to you soon. Take care.